Peace, salam. I'm going to be really quick. I feel nervous. I'm going to try and present just a little bit of new math. The first bit of my theory that I presented as a practice for presenting something, and then surely the first bit will be done. And wow, imagine what happens next. Okay, so just a little essential idea I'm gonna try to teach all the maths at once. I'm trying to present a bit of it. Here's the very first bit that we really need to consider, that out of pure logic, out of just the logic symbols, we're gonna whiz through, see where these logic symbols come from, and we're gonna get implies and not, and we're gonna say we're gonna then try build all of maths out of implies and not, and there's about 3 or 4 tricky challenges, and once we've gotten there, we get to the bottom of a really, really nice and exciting theory. The first thing we need to do is identify that there are certain kind of statements that you can make out of implies and not, which from them you can also get and or. You can also get then this one implies this one and this one implies this one, which is good. That's a sort of therefore or if and only if. Every sentence we can make, they come into 3 categories. I don't want to do this in a video, do it in a video. Every sentence we can make can go into 3 categories. It can be true, false, or sometimes. We have tautologies, like A implies A, and that means, well, that's always going to be true, no matter what A is. We can have A implies not A, and that's always going to be false. Whenever A is the case, A isn't the case, no, that's always going to be false. The third case is really interesting. It is the other sentences that you can't really do anything with in classical logic. In classical logic, where we're reading every sentence as either true or false or maybe, there's not much you can do. So I built a model extension on top, or just found one, that for every thing in the maybe true category, you've in fact got more than infinitely many different conditionality cases. Yeah, they're all conditions, and you know that you can build further and further conditions given a condition. You can find some conditions that are the same and they're not spelled the same way, and they're really interesting. They're a necessity. If I'm allowed to take something and then add something to it without changing its meaning, if I've got one other way that I can change its meaning, then I'm going to be able to find new ways that I can't immediately see that they both say the same thing, but they both say the same thing, which is sort of what we need for a theorem. We know that theorems are going to apply. We can logically prove that theorems are going to happen by seeing that, well, we've got more possible things to say than we have meanings. Pretty quickly we build up to the idea of the theorem, but we use it all the way along, and from this like outside of logic perspective, before we zoom right in, we can say that like the axiom of theorems is that if you can say something 2 different ways without having repeated yourself, then it's true. It's the same as what I've just said, but language can't be the reason those 2 things are the same then. And the other thing is the world. It's surprisingly accurate. Once we have these basic symbols, we can say, well, let's make some interesting conditions. A can be true or false. It's not always true. We don't know anything about it. A and B, same. And in particular, and what has been a problem to the logicization program in the past, is that if I say A and B, it can always be that just A is B, and it's all satisfied by A, and there's this inherent sort of collapsibility that we're going to make use of later, which is that when you evaluate a logical expression, you're always going to look for the minimal thing that satisfies it. If there's loads of different ways to satisfy it, but there's just one, cool. If there's just one, and it's when we see A and B, we want it to be 2 things, but logic doesn't say that A and B is 2 things. But what we can do really quickly is to say A and B, A implies B implies not B implies A. And we have a condition, it can be true or false. Amazingly, for our mathematical purposes, this sentence that we can write in pure logic only applies in universes that have 2 or more objects in them. That A implies B and B and not B implies A. That that doesn't work in a universe that only has one thing. You can check it out, and no, there's no way of like mapping the things that you're trying to describe to the description, and that's how we're going to think of things. So we have this sentence: A implies B implies not B implies A. Only applies in the universe where there's two things. So I call this the existence of two. And then we can think about, obviously, the A implies B implies C implies not C implies B implies A. Well, that's the existence of three. And then as mathematicians, we have a big challenge that surely it doesn't follow the existence of three things from the existence of two things. If I say it's true, A implies B and not B implies A, and or implies between those two is basically equivalent. We can use implies, so we'll probably use implies most of the time, and that's how it is in the book. What do you do then? We'd really like a way from going, well, there's such thing as two, so there's going to be such thing as three, but that doesn't apply logically. If there's two things, there's not necessarily three things. So we got to find a way of making, I'm just going to do the whole thing right now. Sugar. Okay, so you got to find a way of making, well, the kind of conditions where the existence of two does imply the existence of three. It's all going to reduce down into one axiom that says that A implies B implies B not implies A. A implies that A implies B implies not B implies A. Once you have one of those, that can be true or false. We want a whiteboard. The really clever bit, and then you'll have enough to logicize mathematics by yourself, and I'll have stated that I have logicized mathematics. Fucking hell, astaghfirullah. It needed to be done. I spent like 10 years on it. It was fun. Well, the other bit has to do with how we mentioned that a logical sentence, whether it's true or falseness, is based on the minimal satisfiability. If there's any way for it to be true, then it's true. Unless it's a sometimes thing, but in the sometimes case, if there's a way, if you say it's a conditionally true thing and then you compare it to a conditionally true thing, if there's any way that they can both be true at the same time, then it still counts. Well, that's not very good for our maths usually, because it means that structures like A and B and C just collapse and they can be just A. But once we get this idea of structuring where we do exactly what we've done, count it in two different ways, you don't really have that collapsibility problem, but then you have a problem where you've stated a lot. My head is spinning. I haven't had any cannabis today. Just carry on with your sentence, because we're going to find non-trivial solutions. Okay. So I found out that if you put, or I'm arguing really hard, that if you put A implies A, the always true statement, doesn't imply something that comes after it, then that can be true or false. If you say a tautology implies that a tautology doesn't imply, and then you have some conditional case, well, I'm not going to have the capacity to be able to explain why, but if you put, then I can tell you the whole fucking sentence and I don't have to explain it. Sorry. Okay, so you say tautology implies, open brackets, tautology doesn't imply, and then we're only looking for the cases that aren't trivial. So we're going to state a condition, which tautology implies, tautology doesn't imply, A implies B implies not B implies A. So an arbitrary A, we're saying, implies that there's this A and B, that it has a strict successor. The way we can make good on this is then put a implies and then alpha. And then alpha by itself, we know, isn't a trivial satisfaction of this thing. So given all of this without the tautology implies, tautology doesn't imply, if you just had A implies B implies, A implies B, but not B implies A, and alpha, or implies alpha, or within this conditionality alpha. The minimal satisfaction and the thing that logic would choose is that A is alpha or beta, or any of the sub bits of the things that we'd chosen before. But they're specifically the bits that we're not interested in if we want alpha to be independent. So it's a lot like what already happened in model theory, but in logic, that we're looking for the non-trivial satisfactions of logical sentences, and they're going to be basically the maths. And what I've done in that 10 minutes is to put down that you can write your axioms that you might have had in model theory, but just in logic with a bit of logic at the beginning. Seems silly now that I say it, but that's the most important thing. Once you have these structures that you say A implies B implies C and not the other way around, that's not still really like a number. You can't add them together, and you're going to have problems adding them together. So our definition of a number, once we've got as far as sort of being able to describe stuff, noises from the hole. Okay, yeah, we're going to say for the existence of 3, the E3 proof is A implies B implies C implies not C implies B implies A implies / and alpha implies A. So from what we've got so far, that means that A would have to be alpha. And by minimal satisfiability, which we're not going to exclude from this sentence, A is effectively going to be the same as alpha. But we don't need to say that. We're going to check. We're going to make a proof. We say that A implies B implies C implies not C implies B implies A implies alpha implies A implies if alpha implies something and that implies something and not the other way around, well then gamma if and only if C. So to be able to state a sentence in logic, it's going to help us a lot to state it as a theorem. And the thing we had before was a condition case, but now we've got something we've got a theorem because we've said the same thing in 2 different ways without repeating ourselves. It's a trivial theorem for sure, but it's just, you only need it for a number. And so then if we got 2 numbers and we want to add them together, we've got 2 bits of them, so we can put their A, B, and C bits together, and then deduce from the alpha-ness, or from the 2 alpha categories, that there's going to be a longer alpha category, where now what I'm saying is if I choose 3 points, so existence of 3, as we've stated it, is there are 3 points, I can make a path through them. And this particular path is that if I start at the first one and go on 2 steps, I always get to the third one. You really make it clear that there's a number. Then to add them, we can say, well, I can choose a path. If I can choose a path between these three things, and I can choose a path between these 3 things, specifically in the case that they don't overlap at all, which logic would usually exclude for, but by choosing the non-trivial satisfactions only, we can make that happen. Or we can say, we can make what happen? Well, that just sorts out that problem. And then we're going to say, well, we can obviously choose a path that has 6 points on it, and we'll say it again that, if you go from A to B to C, and then maybe from A to B to C, well, that's the same as, and if you go from alpha to beta to gamma to delta to epsilon to that guy, the second C, if and only if, the one that's like a wiggly N. What do you do then? Well, if you've got addition, you've got multiplication. There's some cool stuff about, we need to add about half a dimension to get negative numbers. We need to add just a little tick to everything, or make two cases where there was one case, and then there's going to be this special case 0, which has these new results about it, new true things that couldn't have been true in the other system. We're going to find out that at each sort of layer of the system, there's always something you can define that you can't answer yet. It's in fact, it's not incompleteness, but it's Gödelianism in a very optimistic light, not attributing that Gödelianism to Gödel, but what is surrounded, what has come up is like how we've made sense of it. I'm going to say that the theorem isn't true. I've already said the theorem isn't true. And obviously a logicization of mathematics would be really surprising to everyone who believed Gödel's incompleteness theorem is true. Good. I've got this written down, so I'll put a link to it. Yeah. At a certain point, I send off something bigger than I really ever wanted to mention to. Oh no, I could even keep it. No, I couldn't keep it secret now. I was thinking I could keep it secret and like not give it to the Western Academy, but maybe find another use for it. Anyway, thank you so much again. Bye, peace. Salam. Drugs.